Um, just going back to the beginning of our conversation and also your email campaign. I love your email campaign because I feel that I'm finding out more information that you don't divulge in your regular conversation. And one thing about that was your state before you decided to leave America behind and go on this journey to Thailand and teach math and eventually begin your entrepreneurial journey. And one thing I think that a lot of people can relate with is relationships and relationships with romantic partners and things not going so well and that leading to bouts of bad feelings and bad moods and even depression in some cases. And I'm happy to say that as a married man, I know that's never going to happen again, right? Because I've locked it in. Right? I'm never going to have a depressed breakup and be heartbroken because I have kids and I'm married. So I'm glad that that chapter of my life is done and over with. But with you, it's come up a few times in this conversation. It's come up in your email campaign. So if I can ask you, can you share a little bit more about this relationship that ended after 3 years and how that also impacted you to decide to do something as drastic as go to another country? And I know it's not the only factor, but it seems like it's something that comes up often enough that I know it is part of one of the reasons why you made that decision.
Yeah, this is let's go deep here, Justin. This is good, and
Good.
I'll
Good, good.
probably this is what you wanted. So I'm gonna answer this in the way public facing that I probably never answered it before. So we'll see where this ends up. So yeah, I was in a relationship in college with a girl who was a little bit older than me. We dated from like my junior year of college until we graduated, and then we moved. We weren't living together, but we were in I lived in Washington DC. That's where I was working. Well, actually Arlington, which is like the Virginia side of Washington DC, but it's more or less it's Washington DC. I live pretty close to the Pentagon, for whoever's watching this, if you know where that is. But yeah, we were in a relationship and it just wasn't going that well. And there was a lot of factors going on. So obviously, I'm a very A-type personality. I'm very driven. I want to do good in everything that I do. So I was working really hard, even though I didn't like my job. I was working very hard to be successful in my job. At the same time, I was doing triathlons. So I would spend 3, sometimes 4 hours a day outside of work training aggressively for triathlons because my goal was to place top 3 in the DC triathlon, which was September of 2017. And I did achieve that goal. I actually got 3rd place for my age group in the DC triathlon, which is still my top physical achievement that I've ever achieved. But I didn't have time for the relationship, right? So all of my time was either spent grinding really hard physically or working. But in hindsight, what I was doing was I was using all of the physical challenge as an escape from my social life, right? Because it may not seem like this now, right? For anyone who's listening to this, I'm a very, very introverted person, and I've struggled tremendously in the past with social anxiety, fear of large crowds, even just fear of one-on-one conversations. I'm much beyond where I was in the past, but in the past, those things were very, very difficult for me. So instead of facing those challenges head on, I would use my triathlon training as an excuse, right? Like, oh, it's Friday. We're going to go to dinner with these 3 people. And I'd be like, oh, I don't know. I don't want to go to dinner. Like, I don't know this person. Like, I'm worried. I'm kind of scared, whatever. Oh, well, I have a 5 a.m. swim tomorrow. Like, I can't go. And like that, I was essentially using that as my excuse to not be social. So although I was developing these work skills, I was developing these physical skills and being in tremendous shape. And I was reading voraciously. Like I would read 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours a day, just studying basically entrepreneurs. And I didn't even know why. I was just doing it at that point. But I was neglecting my social life. I was neglecting my relationships. And it's like anything, when you don't flex that muscle, it atrophies. So my social muscle, so to speak, I wasn't developing it as a younger 20-year-old. I wasn't developing that social acumen that I needed to. And, now I talk about things like health, wealth, relationships. Well, I had health dialed in hard. I was making money, but my relationships were shit. Right. And I didn't have the 3 pillars dialed in. And that ended up turning into, I actually initially ended the relationship. And then I felt out on an island, right? I felt alone and isolated and secluded. So I tried to get back into the relationship, which in hindsight, if you end a relationship and you try to go back into a relationship, it's just, how that goes. And I ended up trying to get back into the relationship, and then it wasn't mutual. And then she didn't want to get back into the relationship. And then our friends were basically the same, right? Because we went to college together, we hung in the same crowd. So all the time that I would try to go do things socially, right? Me already having issues getting into social situations, my ex-girlfriend would always be there as well. And that was really, really difficult for me to handle, right? So I got myself to a point where I was, and I'll say this matter of factly, like I was suicidal at a point where there was days at work where I had to leave work. There was a day where my parents live in Philadelphia. My parents are divorced, so they don't really communicate that well. They had to leave Philadelphia and drive to Washington, D.C. to basically make sure that I was good, because I was essentially signaling like, I'm not fucking good. Like I'm really bad. Like if something doesn't happen, like I'm not going to be here that much longer. And I've never actually talked about this openly, but like I had plans. There was drugs involved. I knew exactly what I was going to do to move on from the pain that I was feeling. Right. And that's what it was. It was just a bitter pain. And like the things I talk about now about routines and discipline and all that stuff, I was still implementing that even then, but it got to a point where I didn't work out for almost 2 months. I would spend all day in bed. I wasn't reading. I would just sit and smoke weed all day and just watch bullshit and eat shitty food, basically just essentially self-injuring myself, right? Just being stuck in this situation. Like, I don't give a shit what happens. Like, I'm done with this. And, I was seeing a therapist at the time and my family was really worried. And that's initially when I moved back to Philadelphia, because my family was like, dude, you can't do this. Like you're killing yourself. You're slowly killing yourself. You're not going to be able to sustain this. And that's when I knew, through all of the reading and knowledge and things that I had done in the prior years, was, they tried to put me on meds and all that other, and we can get in a whole conversation about that, but all of that stuff, which I'm a strong advocate against, antidepressants and things like that, Xanax, all that stuff, I think is really, really actually a lot more of a negative than a positive, but they put me on all that shit. And I quit cold turkey. I said, I'm done. I'm not taking any of this medicine. I'm going to figure this shit out for myself. And that's when I booked the flight to Thailand, is when that happened, because I knew the only way for me to really feel better was to radically change my situation. And that's why I say, like, this is still the biggest pain point in my family, is like that period of time when, because everyone was really worried about me, right? And I was really worried about myself. But that period of time was so important for me because it allowed me to radically change my situation. And once I radically changed my situation, things started to improve, right? Now, do I still occasionally struggle with things like anxiety and small bouts of depression? Absolutely, I do. I think everyone to an extent has that, but not nearly as severe as that one episode was. And I'll be even more transparent. Now I lean on things like psychedelics for medication, right? Things like psilocybin mushrooms and mescaline and things like that, they've helped me a ton in the past to get through some of those mental blocks, so that I can just feel more confident and comfortable in myself. So that's kind of the real story about kind of where I was at. And this was like three years ago, really. Almost this period of time, about 3 years ago, was kind of when I was, at my lowest point. And from then, it's just been an upward trajectory. And obviously there's always up and downs, but there's an upward trajectory. And I think that what I'm doing right now is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. This is why I have this massive drive and desire to keep pushing and to help people, because I know what that's like for anyone who's in that situation where it's like every single day just fucking sucks and you can't get out of bed and you can't get through it and there's no end. It's a downward cycle. And like, I know, I was there, I've been there, I know exactly what that is. And I also know the only way to get out of that is to radically change your situation and take action. Because if you don't do anything to get out of your situation, you're going to remain in that same exact spot. The best way to get healthier from a mental perspective is to find things that are uncomfortable and then do them. And that's why I'm such a big proponent of that, because it's been such a big point of growth for me. So that's the long-winded story. And you know, I can laugh about things like this now, but at the time it was not good, bro. Like, shit was not going well. So like, yeah, there it is.
Wow. Just wow. I will say that just so amazing that you felt like sharing all that, because that takes some real guts. And in sharing that, I would say that what you're sharing with us now, it just all comes together. Like your mission, your vision, your story, your authenticity, your credibility, your relatability. I mean, it's just gone up like 100 levels. Like, it's just amazing to hear that from you. Like, these things that we've been seeing, we kind of try to figure it out. Like, what made them make this drastic change? What was a catalyst for that transformation? And sometimes you got to go through some dark places. You got to go through some really heavy challenges to want to even start that transformation. And it just makes sense, like the things that you tell us, like to take massive action, right? To surround yourself with the right people, like to take care of your health and your relationship. Like, it makes so much more sense now. You're not just saying that because it sounds good. You're saying that because you went through a phase in your life where you know how important those things are. So it's just amazing that you brought all those things together. And like I said, like, you kind of touched on these things in the email campaign, but it's kind of like, I want to know more. Are these things he's just writing because it sounds catchy, or are these things really true? And it is true. And it's really good to just get more insight into what brought you to this point now. And um, whatever people go through, like, there is a solution. You just have to start building steam in that direction where you can have a transformation. Surround yourself with the right people. Get out of whatever environment you're in that is holding you back or keeping you unhealthy or keeping you unwell. So, yeah, amazing.